The second lesson is taken from the Gospel of Matthew, the 6th chapter. Set your mind on God's kingdom and His justice before everything else, and all the rest will come to you as well. So do not be anxious about tomorrow. Tomorrow will look after itself. Each day has troubles enough of its own. Let's bow for a moment. In these days of endings and beginnings, grant us one quiet spot here now, where we may be renewed in spirit and hope, and thus ready to live again. For we ask it in the Spirit of Jesus. Amen. From one angle, it's just a night like any other night. Just a midnight in the inexorable flow of time, and yet I think you know as well as I that we shall experience it differently, provided we're still awake. Marlene and I, in any case, will celebrate its passing on a Lufthansa 747 somewhere between here and Frankfurt, Germany, maybe many times with all the time zones we get to go through. But we will all experience the night as we do not experience other nights, because we've made it a powerful symbol of the passing of time. It bears down upon us with the weight of life's essential transiency. Or to put it another way, on this night we're confronted with the reality that life is temporal, that it runs from beginning to end, and all too quickly. In the dark hour of midnight, we are face to face with our mortality, the fact that we do not have forever. Maybe that explains the curious ambivalence we feel about the night, the tendency sometimes to drown its passing in our partying. You have watched, as I have, the crowds gathering at Times Square to cheer as that great ball drops at midnight. Does it still do so? Have you ever wondered what they're cheering about? Why cheer about time slipping away, the fact that we have one less year to live? There's a Peanuts cartoon in which Snoopy is sitting on the top of his doghouse having a one-way conversation with Woodstock. And the first frame has Snoopy looking quizzically down at his friend with the caption, "Is it New Year's already?" The next picture shows his eyes as slits with the gasp, "I can't believe it." The third frame shows Snoopy with his back turned to Woodstock, and he's forlornly thinking to himself, "My life is going by too fast." And in the final frame, he's lying on his back on top of the doghouse with Woodstock perched on his feet, and he's saying, "My only hope is that we go into overtime." Of course, this is not the only occasion on which it bears down upon us, is it? This stark reality. Birthdays can do it, especially if you've accumulated a few of them, especially when you get your birthday right the day before this day. Birthdays coupled with the signs that your body is obviously not brand new. Friend sent me a birthday card this year which read, "Happy birthday, and remember, we are not really old until we develop thankles." Inside I read, "Thankles are thighs where our ankles used to be." Middle age, you know, middle age is when everything starts to click. Your elbows, knees, neck, your back goes out more often than you do, and the little gray-haired lady you help across the street is your wife. Mortality, I think you sense it in watching your children grow up and older. One man writes, "As a teenage boy, I was chosen to accompany my mother, who was a young-looking 53 at the time, on a long bus trip to visit relatives, the only way we could get there. On the return journey, the handsome driver stood outside the bus to assist us in boarding. 'Help your sister with her bag,' he suggested. As I turned to correct him, my mother nudged me in the ribs and said sweetly, 'Never mind, brother, you heard what the man said.'" And you know, as they approach middle age, you begin to realize what that makes you. Occasionally I experience a certain tone of veneration in the way I'm addressed by people that I really consider my peers, but who obviously don't see it that way at all. Concert pianist Mischa Elman made his debut when he was 12. At 72, he was invited to give a concert in Berlin in the same hall where he had made his debut so many years before. And after the concert, he said, "When I made my debut as a 12-year-old, the people all said, 'Isn't he wonderful for his age?' Now they say the same thing." Mortality, we feel it in the passing of friends, the disappearance of faces, familiar. We grieve, I think, as much for ourselves as for them, saddened by the realization of how fleeting life is. Chip Brown writes, "As long as my father lives, I enjoy a kind of shelter, the tangible fact of him, the breath he draws, the aces he serves, the 7-letter words he lays down on the Scrabble board. These kind of postpone the hour when I shall be forced to come to some mortal reckoning of my own. In a sense, my father protects me from time." Is it so surprising that some men midway along turn a bit crazy as their dad leaves them? In his final vulnerability, you see, they experience their own vulnerability, maybe for the first time, and it begins to seep in on them that they too only have so many years, and they begin revising what they want to do with their life and what they want out of it and who they want in it, even to the suffering and chagrin of some of those closest to them. So most of us, most of the time, suppress it, repress it, deny it, smother it, stuff it, inactivity or diversion or one drug after another. You notice how even when we talk about it, we tend to do it in tones humorous and lighthearted. Anything to forget our limits or soften them. It's scary to wake up to reality. The reality that the life that came to you, my friend, with dawn of this day is swiftly slipping away. Scary to be confronted with our creatureliness, our vulnerability, the brevity of our stay here. Scary. Permit me one more favorite Snoopy story. Really, it's about Lucy and Charlie Brown, who are leaning against a tree together. "What do you think security is, Charlie Brown?" Charlie says, "Security? Security is sleeping in the back seat of the car. When you're a little kid and you've been somewhere with your mom and dad and it's night and you're riding in the car and you can sleep in the back seat and you don't have to worry about anything. Your mom and dad are in the front seat and they're doing all the worrying. They're taking care of everything." Lucy smiles and says, "That's real neat." And then Charlie begins to get a dark look on his face, and he raises his finger and says, "But it doesn't last. Suddenly you're grown up, and it can never be that way again. Suddenly it's over, and you'll never get to sleep in the back seat again. Never." Lucy gets a sad, frightened look on her face and says, "Never?" And Charlie, devastated with the terrible truth that he's spoken, replies, "Never." Lucy, stricken with this new knowledge of the real world, reaches over and says, "Hold my hand, Charlie Brown." Scary it is, but it's necessary. Necessary sooner or later to face with the psalmist that 70 years is the span of our life, 80 if our strength holds, at their best, but toil and trouble, for they pass quickly away and we vanish. Necessary sooner or later to pray with the psalmist, "Make us to know how few are our days." Why? So that we can finally begin to live. So that we may become wise, says the psalmist. But wisdom in his world consists in knowing that life is today, now. That we may sing for joy and be glad each day we live. We are truly alive, I think, only when we are present to the present. Not when we're off in our heads somewhere, stewing about yesterday, worrying about tomorrow, wishing life were different. Real life consists finally in being passionately present to, involved in, caring about, attentive to, enjoying intensely the opportunities, challenges, loves, even troubles of here and now. Charles Flandrau put it this way: the greatest gift in life is the realization that life does not consist either of wallowing in the past or peering anxiously at the future. And it's appalling to contemplate the great number of often painful steps by which one arrives at a truth so old, so obvious, so frequently expressed. It is good for one to appreciate that life is right now. Whatever it offers, little or much, life is now, this day, this hour. Dietrich Bonhoeffer writes much the same thing from a prison cell in Berlin in 1944. 10 years is a long time in anyone's life. As time is the most valuable thing we have because it is the most irrevocable, the thought of any lost time troubles us when we look back. And time lost is time in which we've failed to live a full human life, gain experience, learn, create, enjoy, suffer. It's time that has not been filled up but left empty. So look to this day, for it is life, the very life of life. In its brief course lie all the varieties and realities of your existence, the bliss of growth, the glory of action, the splendor of beauty. For yesterday is but a dream, and tomorrow is only a vision, but today well lived makes every yesterday a dream of happiness, and every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day. So do not be anxious about tomorrow. Tomorrow will look after itself, he said. Why don't we live like that? Why don't we really live this day? I think we don't do it because to do so means in some sense to get hold of our mortality, the reality that we only get so many, with all the anxiety that may arouse. As long as we can duck and dodge the truth, as long as we can pretend that the days go on forever, then there's no urgency about the day. Sid Harris once wrote, "It's easy to see the opiate escapist quality of our society when tens of millions of men will spend a splendid Saturday or Sunday afternoon sitting stupefied in front of the television watching the big game when they might be out exercising their own flaccid muscles. It's tempting to call this national malaise of spectatoritis childish, except that children know better. They'd rather run out and play." Well, in any event, we truly become alive only as we face our death, in a curious sense. We truly live today, take today seriously, realize its value, only when we face our mortality, which is just another way of saying face the reality that we only get so many of them, friends. A young college friend wrote me this last year. "I don't know, but lately I've realized that I'm not going to live forever. It's just not going to happen. Death is something that too few people confront. I've got to watch who I spill out my thoughts to because many will conclude that I'm a morbid person. But I believe that one cannot possibly start living until they face death and that death will someday be theirs. I don't think it's morbid at all. In fact, I think it's good because then all is put into perspective. I think it's unreal how we tend to be ruled by trivial things. But once we realize and confront the fact that life won't be ours forever, then and only then can those aspects of life that deserve our time and care really be concentrated on." And I think she's wise well beyond her 20 years of age. And is reciting, is she not, the wisdom of psalmist and philosopher since time began. It's in a way only as we learn to consent to our death and get it behind us, only as we accept deep down that one day we will not be here, that life becomes precious and intense. We're truly able to give ourselves to this day. Remember Pogo? Albert the alligator and his friend the dog are lounging in a boat near the shore in the swamp, the Okefenokee, and Albert complains, "Why does we always get all the bum breaks?" And the dog chimes in, "Well, we can't have everything, good looks, charm, brains, and perfect pitch." "Right," shouts Pogo from the shore. "The best break anybody will ever get is being alive in the first place, and you don't understand what a deal it is until you realize that you ain't going to be stuck with it forever either." An old gentleman is seated on a train, quietly looking out the window, noticing everything that goes by, the lines of the houses, the wire-connected poles, the rolling clouds, the children at play. And a woman he doesn't even know is seated next to him, and smiling, he waves to a passing hay wagon. "See," he says, chuckling, "hay going to the barn. Isn't that wonderful?" And the woman's a bit curious. "What's so wonderful about a hay wagon?" she asks. To which the old gentleman replies, "You think it strange that a hay wagon can mean so much to me? But you see, last week my doctor told me I was living on borrowed time. And ever since, everything has looked that much more beautiful, so much more important. I feel as if I'd been asleep and only just waked up." But you know, in a sense, we're all living on borrowed time, aren't we? Time lent us, time that we do not really possess or guarantee. So what gives us the courage to accept that reality, in spite of the anxiety, to consent to our death and live for today? Well, Jesus could accept the reality of his death, that is, of his finitude, of his mortality, because he believed that that was not the final word about him, because he believed that his Father was infinitely greater than either his living or his dying. Jesus could live intensely in today because he could trust all his tomorrows into God's powerful and loving hands. And he invites us to do the same. Are you not worth more than the birds? So do not be anxious about tomorrow. A friend of mine in Boston wrote to me about the passing of his wife. "Please remember me in your prayers," he writes. "I'm a walking zombie, but a passage from Longfellow's Hyperion comes to mind. Look not mournfully into the past, it will not come back again. Wisely improve the present, it is thine. Go forth into the shadow future without fear and with a manly heart." Do you hear it? In trust, the anxiety surrounding our mortality lifts a bit, and we can face the fleeting character of our days and turn to live intensely this one. This one. Dr. David LaFay is a surgeon. He writes, "When I was an atheist, I took the humanist view that it was more difficult and courageous to live without the support of Christian faith. Fortunately, experience has changed all this. There's a moving story of a man suffering from a malignant tumor of the pelvis who was miraculously cured after praying to the Virgin at Lourdes. And I've seen the case history, and it's pretty convincing. In any event, the man remained at Lourdes in service, and many years later was grievously injured, and he was urged to pray once more to be rescued. "No," he said, "I've had my turn." And he resigned himself and later died. And we are all in his position. We all have our turn, and we must all resign ourselves. Then he continues, "When my children were small, we used to play a game in which they shut their eyes and let themselves fall backward off a low table, confident that their father would be there to catch them. And it was a game that called for a lot of courage and absolute trust. But we may be certain as well that there will be someone there to catch us." You see, that's how we do it. In trust, we face eternity without fear, confident that someone will catch us when it comes. And so we are liberated to live this day, one more day, wisely, fully, joyfully. One more day. Have a good day.